My name is Max Sternberg. I'm a lecturer at the Department of Architecture and a fellow here in Pembroke. I essentially work in the field of history and theory of architecture and urban studies, and I've got two distinct areas of interest. One is the architecture of the Middle Ages, the social functions of medieval architecture, but also our modern perception of medieval architecture and how medieval architecture has informed modernism in particular. My second area of interest is the politics of architecture and the politics of urban design, and also the politics of heritage practices. I'm very interested in the relationship of modernity and modernism, architectural modernism, and the medieval and the Middle Ages. And I sort of argue that that's a reciprocity. The way we've looked at medieval architecture is inevitably colored by our own modern conceptions of art and architecture. And in turn, the way we imagine and think about modernism is inevitably framed by history, by our historical experiences, how we think about other periods. Now, on the face of it, modernism and medieval architecture are at odds with one another. One looks radically forward, the other one's very rooted in tradition. And one of the ways in which I've been exploring this is through the relationship of Le Corbusier, the most prominent modernist architect of the 20th century, and how he experienced the medieval architecture of the Cistercians. The Cistercians were a 12th century reforming order. They were the most prominent builder of the 12th century, and they created some of the finest medieval buildings that we are aware of today. Think of Rivaux and fountains in Yorkshire, for example, or think of Le Toronnet and Sylvacane in the Provence in France. Those are buildings that many people have visited, and there's an increasing number taking an interest in that. And when Le Corbusier, who's a notorious atheist, is asked to design both a church and a monastery, he's asked to visit the Cistercian Abbey of Le Toronnet, and he's absolutely fascinated by that. And later on, he would talk about how influential this experience was for him, and that he was essentially trying to capture that sense of a timeless, primitive, sacred space for his modern ambitions. And to this day, Le Toronnet is probably the most important architectural precedent for La Tourette. And that to me speaks of that reciprocity of the way we are influenced by our modern ideas about how we think about medieval architecture in its own context, and how we then use that experience to frame our ambitions for meaning in architecture today. So I'm interested in the politics of architecture. I've been studying divided cities, cities that are somehow contested by several national communities. I've worked on Jerusalem, and more recently I've worked on the Polish-German border and border settlements, towns on the border. I'm especially interested in that relationship of how conflict shapes space and how in turn that space affects the conflict. With respect to the Polish-German border, I've been most interested to see how Polish-German communities have reinvented public space to create a sense of shared space. For decades, these towns have been town halves, and with Poland joining the European Union, there's been an opportunity to create a shared urban environment. And I've been particularly interested in looking at heritage sites and how people have been able to address their common traumas to essentially address the future. And one of the key examples there is a church, which was the most prominent church in this formerly German town. It's now on the Polish side, and Polish and German civil society activists have come together to reconstruct the church. So for many decades, the church symbolized the violence they experienced and was a real scar, and the fact that it was left as a ruin symbolized that inability to overcome conflict. And more recently, its reconstruction has really rallied both towns together, and I think for the first time we're seeing a genuine example of Polish-German space which is beyond merely Germany or Poland. It's a genuine local, transnational identity, and it's by confronting the difficulty of their shared histories that they've been able to reinvent their futures.